Characters in EU5 are a real missed opportunity. They are what I like to call numbers with faces. When we think about EU4, there were essentially no characters. There too, they were simply numbers with names attached, not even faces. Generals were just names with pips attached, rulers were just names with mana attached. Advisors were the most real, actually having portraits. And then when we came to EU5, the whole character system was overhauled. Now characters are real people. They have families and dynasties and personality traits, as well as stats. But none of those things are really utilized in EU5. Instead, when you appoint characters in EU5, you're 100% just looking at their stats. There's no reason to concern yourself with their personalities or potential place in your government, outside of members of the Crown Estate, which simply give you a bonus to your Crown Estate by appointing them. There's no way in EU5 for an ambitious general to rebel and attempt to seize power. There's no way for a corrupt regent to extend their regency indefinitely and corrupt the state. There's no way for a shadowy cabal of ministers to band together to ensure their political goals are met. Characters in EU5, despite being characters, don't have any character. There's simply no way for them to actually do anything in the game. And it's disappointing because if we compare the characters in EU5 to Imperator Rome, the game that EU5 took a lot of inspiration from, in Imperator Rome, those things can happen. An ambitious general can become disloyal. He'll no longer follow orders and take his army and do as he wishes. If he accumulates enough power and influence, he can cause a civil war and attempt to seize the throne. Governors in Imperator Rome are much the same. Often in Imperator Rome, you're encouraged to allow corruption on a certain level, to keep your governors and other characters happy by allowing them to be a little corrupt, because it's better to have a small amount of corruption amongst your characters than it is to have them engage in revolts. But unfortunately, those systems have not made it into EU5. You never really have to worry about who you're appointing to a position in EU5. Their character, their personality traits have no effect on them. The only characters in the game that personality traits actually affect are rulers, and even then, it's to a minor degree, which does make me wonder, what was the point of creating a system for characters if characters aren't going to be used? They are, as I've said, simply faces with numbers. Any potential for politics or sedition by characters simply doesn't exist in the game. That 100 being ruled by a 000 is never going to think, oh, maybe I'd be a better ruler for the state. And it gets even stranger when we think that EU5 doesn't really have any succession crises or succession wars. The brothers and uncles of rulers are totally fine spending their whole lives being assigned to integrating provinces and never doing anything other than that, never having land of their own, never attempting to take the throne that they themselves have a claim on. They're just there. You don't even think about them. You don't even think, oh, can I trust the brother of my ruler not to cause trouble in the future? Because he never will. There's simply no way for him to do so. Now, I'm not saying the game needs to go all the way and have the game revolve entirely around characters, but it does seem strange that Imperator Rome, a game that very much inspired EU5, and EU5 could just be considered Imperator Rome 2, completely dropped the idea of characters that Imperator Rome had that made them very relevant to the game. I'm sure there's those of you who will say, in 5-10 years, Paradox will release a DLC that improves the character system. And that is a legitimate view. I just wonder why, when we already had a functional system in Imperator Rome, they essentially went back to the drawing board for EU5. It also feels like characters are barely attached to their estates. If there's a revolt amongst the nobility, the nobles in your court don't seem to really care. Their loyalty is always assured, outside of the few characters that are scripted to join the rebellion. It feels like there's a real disconnect between the mechanic of estates and characters themselves that are members of estates. There seems to be almost no overlap. There's no leader of a specific state in your country. There's no head of the nobility or most influential noble who you can essentially bribe or keep on side, and he will ensure the loyalty of the nobility, which is strange because this period, the EU5 period, was filled with influential people leading their estates. Someone like Oliver Cromwell, a minor member of the gentry, rising up to lead the noble faction essentially, and then become ruler after the Civil War, simply can't happen through EU5's current mechanics. Someone like John Hunyadi achieving great deeds as a general, which leads to his son being elected ruler by the nobility, simply can't happen in EU5 naturally. The various politicking that took place in Japan after Oda Nobunaga's death, which resulted in his family essentially being vassalized by their own vassals as they made puppets of his children, simply can't happen in EU5. Vassals as characters will never try to influence succession or appoint successors that they prefer. Even the children of a king will never vie for power and try to seize throne from their siblings. Despite this period of history being very character driven, Paradox has decided to place all of the power into the hands of abstract organizations like estates, and characters themselves kind of feel like they've been left by the wayside. They're just there. Their only real relevance in how much they increase their estate's power by being appointed to positions. The power that characters actually have themselves just doesn't exist. It's not represented in EU5. And that is a disappointment. And it is a waste. Why go through the effort of creating this character system, giving them families, giving them dynasties, giving them stats and traits, if we're not going to use it? It's really just an underutilized system that I wish had been fleshed out more. Or, if they weren't gonna flesh it out, we should just stick to a simpler system like EU4 to avoid getting my hopes up. For now though, this is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts on characters in EU5 and in the other games. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.